It's Lions Talk with Smoke and Jeremy B. I'm not using my usual intro. I'm leaving that just for my kneecap fighting with the Detroit Lions NFL Roundtable and the Lions Fan Cave chat. Let's get into this. Last year, we saw a deep dive for the Lions, a deep change for the Lions after that one and six abysmal start. And then they started winning games. They started having winning streaks. It was the crazy thing. We went from 1 and 6 to 2 and 8, or 8 and 2. I mean, it was night and day switch. The main thing that changed for me, it was the firing of Aubrey Pleasant and also the sitting of Michael Brockers. That was the two biggest changes that happened after that 1 and 6 start. Michael Brockers was considered a starter for most of that part of the season. He did nothing. He wasn't stopping the run. He wasn't applying pressure. He wasn't eating up blocks. He wasn't allowing anyone to get past until he sat down. Michael Brockers was a big reason on why that whole left side of the line couldn't do anything. Um, you look at our first 7 games, we gave up a total of 1,362 yards and 106 1,084 yards on the ground. That that made the biggest switch altogether. Now, granted, that equaled out to 194.57 yards through the air we gave up through those first 7 games, but we gave up an abysmal 154.85 yards on the ground. That being said, that is it in a nutshell right there. The thing that, what's crazy is we gave up more passing yards during the 10-game winning streak on an average at 231.4, but we gave up 13 less yards on the ground and less touchdowns, which meant we were doing goal line stands. We were stopping people when it counted. Aubrey Pleasant being fired, he had a very difficult man zone coverage where the defensive backs struggled to do their assignments. Then we learned as we went on who was talent and who wasn't. Because what happened was we started getting turnovers during that 8 and 2 stretch. Kirby Joseph started to show out. 3 picks on Aaron Rodgers says a lot. Um, Dre Bly is who's on this year's roster as in coaching. I'll address the chats after. So right now we're not going to be addressing the chat. This show is more about information than doing the live chat. I'll do live chats at the end. Um, but let's go down the list. Passing yards through the first 7 games: 236 to the Eagles, but 216 yards rushing. The Commanders, we gave up 308 yards through the air, but only 88 yards rushing. Main reason we won right there. In the loss the next week, 250 and 123, 320 and 235, 188, 176, 191, 139, 369 and 107. Then once we started winning, I mean, you really didn't see a big difference in week 1. It was or week 9 technically, because that was after the bye week. That was 283 yards to the air and 106 on the ground. Then we win with somebody getting a shit ton of yards on the ground. Oh yeah, that was Green Bay because they couldn't score. Because every time they got in the red zone, Kirby Joseph or Aiden Hutchinson intercepted it. It was 150 yards through the air and 258 yards on the ground. Then we had 324 yards in the air and 89 yards on the ground against. Against the Bills, we actually did decent in the air. We only gave up 237 yards, but we gave up 164 on the ground was a big reason why we lost. The next week, 171 to 90 and 95, 394 through the air and 22 yards rushing, 287 through the air and 50 yards rushing, and then the abysmal Panthers game where we let them have 250 yards in the first half and only 70 in the second half. But at the same time, we gave up 200 yards passing and only 50 in the second half. So it was a tale of two halves there because they changed equipment. And then against Minnesota in week 17, we gave up 30 yards through the air and 200 yards on the ground. Somehow we won that game, but it's because they couldn't get in. And then the last week, it was 188 yards through the air and 103 on the ground for Green Bay. And it's crazy that in 10 games, we gave up 1,412 rushing yards when we gave up 1,084 in 7. 15 guys were jettisoned off this roster, and 5 of them being starters at the beginning of the season that were starters on this team. Michael Brockers, Jeff Okudah, Amani Oruwariye, Deshaun Elliott. It's mind-boggling. Oh, yeah, and Chris Board was the other starter next to Anzalone in Game 1. So that's another one that's gone. So you look at all that, and that is why there was such a shift. We went to a more zone coverage, which is why Jeff Okudah started failing, because he was doing good in the passing game in the beginning. And then once he got hurt and he came back and we switched, he was never the same guy, because all he's good at is press man coverage. He is not good in zone. Amani Oruwariye, what happened to him, that is beyond me, because he was great in zone the year before. And then all of a sudden he fell apart. All right, so that is it in a nutshell for defensively why it changed. And the big thing was we had 10 turnovers in that 10-game stretch where we had only 2. Okay, Patty Grimes says, "What's up?" Donkey Kong says, "What's up, dudes? Firing Pleasant was huge, and oh yeah, Dre Bly is going to be huge this year." Quinn Cook says, "Hey JB, rumor is Giants want to trade for Julian Okwara." Yeah, I know Donkey Kong is supposed to be Dre Bly. Brent DeWitt, under 10 sacks, definitely over. Yeah, definitely. And the sack rate went up. And the biggest thing that changed, and it was right after the Bills game, that was when John Comiskey came back, and all of a sudden the sack fest began. And that's also when James Houston hit the scene, because that was the last 8 games. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You know, Aiden Hutchinson had 6.5 of his sacks during that time, and Houston had his 8.5 sacks. It was an amazing time to see all of that happening. And then Aleem got one here and there. Bugs got a sack. They started stopping the run more. When you stop the run, you control the flow of the game and you control the tempo. It gets teams out of a rhythm. That is the main thing that switched. And Michael Brockers not being on the field. So that is that breakdown in a nutshell. The guys we kept on the roster, we all know who they are. I mean, we kept Tracy Walker because we just re-signed him and he was coming off of an injury. We kept Kirby Joseph. For some reason, the coaches love Will Harris, who's better at slot corner than he ever was at safety, because in 2021 at safety, he got a 20 PFF, and last year he managed a paltry 61.2, which is miles better, but it doesn't mean he's good. Savion Smith played some meaningful snaps until he got hurt. Jerry Jacobs ended up hitting the active roster and doing some things well. I think he had 5 passes defended in the 4 games he played. Ify Melifamu, he had 2 pass breakups when he would come in whenever Kirby went off the field. So he did okay, but he was used very sparingly. I think he only had 14 snaps played. So, the sky is the limit with what we added. We replaced Okuda and Oruwariye with Sutton and Mosley and CJGJ, and then we drafted Branch. And we've got a much deeper roster in the secondary than we've had ever, in my opinion. And then we also got, because we went to a 4-2-5, we were using less linebackers, but there's more talent in that room now because there's less of this fringe talent that we don't need. And Jalen Reeves may even come back, and Rodrigo has been lighting it up in special teams, but he also did well with the third stringers last week. He was our highest rated linebacker or defensive player, period, with a 77.2, which is an average NFL linebacker rating. Elites get over 80 to 90. So there's the difference there. The only guy that's gotten a 90 rating this preseason on defense for the Lions has been Jack Campbell in game 1. The starters aren't playing right now, and we should see that change here shortly because, hey, what is it? We're 17 days away from game 1. Can't wait. So what do you guys want to talk about now? I mean, I got pretty much the nutshell for you, but I think it's crazy. We gave up 40 more passing yards per game, but that 13 yards less in rushing meant a lot of difference. I don't think we're going to play Goff at all. I have that feeling that this year, Dan Campbell said, see, we played you last year. You saw what happened. We're not playing any of our starters this year. We're going to let all the camp bodies that are battling for a roster spot play. Carolina's talking about playing Bryce Young because he's 8 of 20 and got 2 picks and sacked 4 times so far. Because this is the question and answer. I mean, if you want to ask anything, go right ahead. Mims is returned to the injured reserve. They said that he was going to be examined by the medical staff. Depending on the grade of his injury, he may be released on an injury settlement. But the fact that no news has came out since he's been back for 24 hours now, he might not be as hurt as everyone thinks, and he might be able to come back sooner, which means we may keep him on the 4 or 8 week injured reserve list. Which is fine. We still got the 6th round pick back because he was medically waived. Hey, that's kicking the tires and getting something for nothing. I like it. Because Mims was actually looking good in the joint practices with Goff. We heard Marvin Jones Jr. is starting to look good. Josh Reynolds is coming into form, which is great to hear because we were worried that they weren't going to be hearing their names at all there for a minute because, well, MJJ got here and was hurt right away in training camp, so therefore he couldn't take place in the first set of week 1 joint practices, but in week 2, he had a nice back of the end zone, jumped up over a defender and caught the ball. He had a couple of nice plays here and there. Laporta and Gibbs have been the talk of the offense. And of course, Chase Cota and Dylan Drummond, with what they've been doing in the games, they're fringe talent to make this roster. Especially with Jameson Williams going to be out for 6 weeks due to his suspension. I mean, granted, he's hurt right now and not playing, but he's able to be in the facility with the rehabbers right now and get what he needs to do to get back healthy. So I think that's a good thing for him. but we went from horrendous to okay. We went from giving up 32 points a game down to 28.2 is what the final stats were at the end of the season. But in order to do that, to improve by a 5 point swing, you had to do 10 points better over that 10-point game to lower that average to the 28 points per game, which means that we were actually only giving up about 23.6 games per game, which means we played like a top 15 defense, which if we'd have played top 15 all year, we could have made the playoffs, because that means we'd have probably had stops against the Eagles and the Seahawks in those first few games, and we lost close ones. And it looks like Amon-Ra has returned to practice, so he's doing fine. Hopefully he doesn't tweak that again. And this has been the 2022 defensive season in a nutshell. What was wrong? What was fixed? I'm happy with the additions we have to make the defensive better, and I think we should be able to play at that same level that we ended the season on, if not better. I project probably somewhere between 18 and 13 is where we'll end up defensively, barring, please, sweet baby Jesus, no injuries. This has been Lions Talk with Jeremy Ballreich. Since there's no more, oh wait, maybe there are some more. I don't think any starters are going to play, and I hope Kamish gets the night off to Brent DeWitt. Yep, we tightened up in the red zone. Exactly. Let's go Ravens, keep the streak alive. All right, guys, this has been Lions Talk with Jeremy Ballreich on Kneecap Biting with the Detroit Lions channel. I hope you all had a good night. Have a blessed evening. And just remember, try every day to be a better person than you were the day before. It's the only way to make the world a better place. Thank you, and good night.